Hi everyone, this is Anushka Vora. I welcome you all at the knowledge session on independent directors. This session will entirely be focused on the appointment and reappointment process relating to the independent directors. First of all, a question that arises is why the process of appointment and reappointment of IDs is relevant to understand now. SEBI came up with third amendment under the LODR regulations in August 2021, which are applicable from January 1, 2022. Uh, we we are already in the middle of December, and not much time is left for the companies to do the preparatory work and to be in line with this amendment, which becomes applicable from January 1 onwards. So we need to understand what actually has changed for the appointment and the reappointment process of the IDs. So without further ado, let's start with the discussion. I'll share the screen. Okay. First of all, we start with the chronology of events. We see how this amendment has taken place. So firstly, SEBI came up with the consultation paper on March 1, 2021. This consultation paper was to review the regulatory framework around the independent directors. Uh, Secondly, this consultation paper was then open for public comments, and SEBI at its board meeting on June 29 then reviewed the public comments and approved or the proposals of the consultation paper were reviewed. Then on August 3, the SEBI LODR Third Amendment regulations, they came into picture, which become applicable from January 1, 2022. So before we actually get to understand what the amendment has taken place and what is the new framework, we also have to understand what is the current framework which is currently in practice. So what generally happens is the board of directors, they are empowered by the articles of association that they can appoint a director. Also they can appoint an independent director, or they can appoint additional directors, and similarly an additional director can also be appointed in the capacity of an ID. So generally, there are situations like, for example, a company. There is the company needs to comply with the board composition. The tenure of the IDs are about to expire. So in such a situation, the board has the power that the board can appoint. It is not always possible to call a general meeting to call all these shareholders. So the board has the power that it can appoint an independent director or other director as per the section 161 of Companies Act. Such additional director can also be appointed in the capacity of an entity. So what the general practice is, the nomination and remuneration committee recommends name of a person to be appointed as an independent director to the board. The board then approves such appointment, and such director who is appointed, such additional director holds his office till the next AGM, or the last date on which the AGM should have been held, whichever is earlier. So we see that, of course, the general power of appointment of director is with the shareholders only. So this appointment is then subject to the approval of shareholders, which happens at the next AGM or the last date on which the AGM should have been held, whichever is earlier. And this appointment is then approved by an ordinary resolution in case of all the directors, even if that person is an ID. So when the board appoints such person as an additional director, that person holds the office of the ID from that very date. So the person has to fulfill the criteria of independence also. Looking at the framework of reappointment, here again, what companies generally follow is like before the term of an independent director is about to expire, before the expiry of tenure, the board takes the proposal of the reappointment to the shareholders, and then such reappointment has to be approved by way of a special resolution. This requirement of special resolution, this comes from one second. Yeah. So this requirement of special resolution, this comes from Companies Act. The special resolution was not the earlier requirement under LODR. Coming to the next, the amended regulatory framework. So we see what the consultation paper had proposed and what SEBI approved at its board meeting, which finally took, which finally was the amendment. So SEBI had its consultation paper regarding the appointment or reappointment of IDs. Two terms were proposed, that is a dual approval and prior approval. So firstly, we have to understand, we understand what these two terms meant. So let's have a look at the consultation paper. So the consultation paper, as I've already told, it talks about two things, the dual approval and prior approval. So let us see what the dual approval was meant to be. It was, I'll just read it out. Appointment and reappointment of IDs shall be subject to dual approval taken through a single voting process and meeting following two thresholds. Approval of the shareholders, approval by majority of the minority shareholders. So what was proposed is dual approval was proposed for both appointment and reappointment. Appointment, as we know, is through ordinary resolution by the shareholders, and reappointment in the Companies Act already it's by way of a special resolution. So dual approval in case of appointment meant that the shareholders will approve it by way of ordinary resolution, that is 51% or more. The rest of the shareholders who voted against the resolution, the majority of that minority should also be voting in favor. Then only the resolution would be passed. And in case of reappointment, the special resolution has to be obtained firstly, which is 75% or more, and then the rest of the shareholders who did not vote in favor, the majority of that minority also has to vote in favor. So this was the proposal of dual approval. Again, here another point which was mentioned here is that in case the dual approval does not get passed, right, any of the two the thresholds are not met, in that case the board can propose the appointment of the same independent director after a cooling period of 90 days, but within 120 days, or he has to bring the board has to bring any other person to be appointed as an ID. So this the proposal of dual approval was not approved by SEBI at its board meeting. It was not considered to be proceeded with, and this was turned down. Along with this dual approval, there was also a proposal of prior approval. So here it said that the prior approval of shareholders should be obtained for appointment of IDs. Right. So here the concern which was mentioned is that, like we have seen under section 161, that a person who is appointed as a additional director, even in the capacity of an ID, he would hold office till the next AGM. His appointment will be regularized by the shareholders at the next AGM. So suppose the AGM has just concluded, and after the conclusion of the AGM, the board now appoints a person as an ED, appoints an ID as an AD. Now that person will hold the office up to the next AGM. So that the considerable amount of time gap. This was the concern over here, that when that person when that person's appointment is finally brought to the shareholders, if the shareholder does not approve that appointment, then that person would have already served few months on the board as an independent director. So this was uh, considered to be against the interest of the minority shareholders. So this prior approval was proposed. Now we see that both of these proposals, that is of dual approval and prior approval, was not approved by SEBI. SEBI at its board meeting did not approve both of these concepts, but special resolution for appointment and for reappointment was proposed. So the amendment process, which was approved finally, was that the NRC is going to recommend the appointment of the person as an independent director. The board will then approve that appointment, and appointment of the director, of the independent director, will be placed before the shareholders. That is, it has to be approved by the shareholders at the next general meeting or within 3 months from the date of appointment, whichever is earlier. So this was the thing which was approved. SEBI did not approve dual approval. SEBI did not approve prior approval. But however, considering that the time gap, there was a prolonged time gap that was considered, and this period of 3 months was approved. So another important question which arises here is that whether the approval of shareholders is prior or post facto approval would do. So why this confusion, or why this question comes at the first place, is when we see regulation 25(2)(a) and 17(1)(c). Both of these were new insertions by the SEBI third amendment. So 25(2)(a) is only for an independent director, only for appointment, reappointment, removal of an ID. It says that such appointment, reappointment, removal shall be subject to approval of shareholders by way of a special resolution. 17(1)(c), on the other hand, is for all the directors, including the IDs. And it states that the listed entity has to ensure the approval of shareholders for appointment of a person at the next general meeting or within a time period of 3 months from the date of appointment, whichever is earlier, which we just discussed. So 25(2)(a) is only for independent directors, and 17(1)(c) is for all the directors, which includes the IDs. So on a conjoint reading of both of these regulations, we come to a conclusion that prior approval of shareholders is not required. The approval of shareholders has to be obtained at the next general meeting or within 3 months from the date of appointment, that is within from 3 months when the board had appointed that person, whichever is earlier. So next we move on to the approval process, which would be effective from January 1, 2022 and onwards. So along with the appointment and the process of appointment of independent directors, another important thing which came as a change in the third amendment regulation was that the role of NRC was enhanced. The nomination and remuneration committee, anyways, they evaluate the person to be brought about as to be brought as a director. The role of NRC was enhanced. The nomination and remuneration committee already has the responsibility of enhancing the skills, the talent, and then recommending a person to the board of directors. It was felt that more transparency and more disclosure is required on the part of the NRC while recommending director to the board. So the role of NRC was expanded to, which included the evaluation of skills, knowledge, experience, then preparing the description of skills and responsibilities that are required on the board, and whether the person who is proposed to be appointed fulfills such criteria or not. So the NRC's role from January 1, 2022 is also going to be is also going to be expanded. Then the NRC is going to recommend to the board. Board will then propose the same for the approval of shareholders at the next general meeting or within 3 months from the date of appointment, whichever is early. Next, we have a comparative analysis covering the extant framework and the current framework, which would be a quick review. So, appointment, the extant framework, the current framework, basically, which is applicable till 31st December, is that the board will appoint a person as an additional director. Such person will then hold office up to the next EGM and will be regularized by the shareholders by way of an ordinary resolution. Now, from 1st January 2022 and onwards, board will appoint a person as an additional director. Such person will then be regularized by the shareholders at the next general meeting or within 3 months from the date of such appointment, whichever is earlier. And such regularization will be by way of a special resolution and not ordinary resolution. In case of reappointment, even now, the reappointment is to be done by way of a special resolution. Companies Act says so that in case of independent director, the reappointment is to be approved by way of a special resolution. And again, there's no change in the case of reappointment. Even now, the companies go for special resolution in case of reappointment, and I said the same was proposed under LODR 2. So this was our discussion on the appointment or reappointment of the independent directors, which is going to be effective from January 1, 2022. I hope you found this video informative. Thank you for being a part of the discussion. Thank you.